Today's topic is postmodernism and post-colonialism. Postmodernism is said to be a period concept by some people, and some people think it is a genre or a style. If it is a period concept, it comes after the modernist period. According to Frederick Jameson, it is a cultural logic of late capitalism. But he says postmodernism is ahistorical. It does not reflect history, and it relegates history to a kind of textuality. But people like Linda Hudson say that postmodernism is not simply against history. It problematizes history, and it is also political, but it is a contradictory form. In what sense is it contradictory? It is both a continuation and a contradiction of modernism. Modernism is a very important phase in the literary history of the West. People like T.S. Eliot are considered to be great modernists. What did they do? They reflected the chaos of modern life. But even while doing so, they tried to create a kind of order out of disorder, a kind of coherence out of incoherence. The Wasteland is a magnificent modern epic portraying the chaos of contemporary history in a very, very orderly way. But postmodernism questions the concept of the center. The center tries to control everything, and it is seeking unity and continuity, but postmodernism denies unity and continuity. This is what we find in writers like Salman Rushdie or Garcia Marquez. In their novels, there is a questioning of history. There is a problematization of history. Let me analyze Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children. You know, it is a parody of Indian history. It is a parody of modern Indian history. Salim Sinai is born on the 15th of August 1947. It's a very important historical day, but Rushdie tries to connect the day with his own birth, and he seems to give the impression that his birth is more important than the birth of free India. He says, once upon a time, I was born. Let me specify the time exactly. On 15th August at midnight. When I was born, the whole world, the whole country was jubilant. Soothsayers prophesied my arrival. The country was celebrating my arrival. You know, Rushdie seems to feel that his birth is more important than the birth of free India. This is the essence of the postmodernist technique. Postmodernism tries to reduce history to the common perspective. History is not just the grand event of great people, history is connected with anonymous forces, ordinary individuals, and to try to locate a center in the history is a false thing. So what happens in Midnight Children is, throughout the novel, history is handcuffed to Rushdie's hero. Rushdie's hero is Rushdie himself. Here is a handcuffing of history to the hero and handcuffing of the hero to the history. In this process, he is trying to show that neither history nor the self has any unity. This is the most important thing. You know, there is another important aspect of a postmodernist work. In the postmodernist work, we find fantasy and realism combining. Right in the beginning, he wants to show that the reality of modern India is fantastic, but at the same time it is real. The fantasy is real and the real is fantastic. This kind of combination is essential to the postmodernist art. Some people use the word magic realism. In postmodernism, we see magic realism. What does that mean? It is not like the old realism. The old realism tried to portray reality as it is. But in postmodernism, reality is simultaneously both fantastic and real. So the novel shows an epic journey which is simultaneously fantastic and realistic. Another important stylistic feature of postmodernistic writing is the combination of historiography and metafiction. According to Linda Hudson, historiographic metafiction is the unique literary form of postmodernism. What does it mean? Historiographic metafiction. Historiography is concerned with actual historical events, but metafiction is concerned with the fictionality of fiction. Here's a strange paradox. History is seen as fiction, and fiction is seen as contributing to history. According to a great critic, in postmodern writing, we see history being constituted as fiction and fiction as conditioning history. We find this in Rushdie's Midnight Children. It is a story. It is an autobiography. It is an autobiography plus the story of a nation, but all the time we find reality and fiction, or history and fiction changing places. But it is not the usual kind of history. There is a great modern philosopher whose approach to history is different. It is called effective history. He prefers archaeology to chronology. Chronology is sequential. Archaeology is not sequential. Therefore, there is an attempt to unfold layers of complicated history in a very disorderly way, because according to Foucault or Salman Rushdie, history is contradictory. History is not coherent, and this sort of combination of coherence and contradiction we find in Rushdie's novel. You know, he talks about his adventures, and all the important events of his life are linked to the important events of Indian history, modern Indian history. He is supposed to be All India Radio. He is connected with Jallianwala Bagh. He is connected with Jawaharlal Nehru's independence speech. But all the time, the great events of contemporary Indian history are ridiculed, laughed, and so that they are seen as part of this little man's perception. Great men do not make history. History is made of little events of little men. And this is the approach. And not only that, there is a lack of unity both in the life of Rushdie or Salim and the life of the nation. He tries to connect both. You know, the great Indian subcontinent after independence became two nations, one India and the other Pakistan. And Rushdie belongs to both. And he wants to show that there is no unity between the two sides of history. There is no unity similarly in his life. You know, there was a snake bite which made him forget his past. And therefore, what we find is a kind of lack of unity in the story of Salim as well as the history. And he wants to show that Pakistan was a kind of an illusion, but India was a kind of a myth. And India is a new myth. The myth of the Punjabi, the Maharashtrian, the South Indian. They try to create a new history and a new myth. And this new myth is history. Whereas in Pakistan, he says there is illusion, falsehood and lies. Midnight Children, there is a constant problematizing of history, nation and the self. Particularly, he wants to show that Indian history is not as unified as people think. And for this purpose, he wants to show that even Mahatma Gandhi's death can take place on different dates. So he deliberately falsifies the date of Mahatma Gandhi's death, and he says, in my story, Gandhi can die on any day. So this sort of contradiction is an important feature of Rushdie's view of history. It goes on like that, and then there is again a recovery of memory by Salim, and then he again participates in the history of India, but finally he says, I would like to complete the story, but how can I complete it? There are 2 or 3 possibilities, he says. He says, my story can end either this way or that way or that way. He deliberately wants to show that it is a story, a story, a story. A story can have any end. It can have many ends. So he suggests all the possibilities, but finally he wants to show that he will dissolve into the multitude of the people of India. He is connected with the great past, but he is also connected with the future, but he is just a small chain, a small link, a link in the great chain of the magnificent history. And but even though he is just an ordinary link, he is also a participant in the great history, and he wants to show that history is basically orderless, and Rushdie's Midnight Children in this way tries to show the fictionality of history and the historical nature of fiction, and thereby it becomes a typical postmodern novel. Now let me proceed to post-colonialism. Post-colonialism is also a contemporary literary phenomenon. It shares certain qualities of postmodernism, but it is also different. In what sense is it like postmodernism? It also questions the center. Whereas postmodernism questioned the unity of modernism, post-colonialism questions the universalism and the Eurocentrism of colonialism. This is a reaction to colonialism. The colonialists tried to create universalist texts, and they tried to reduce their colonized people to their own perspective. But in the post-colonial writing, the empire writes back to the center. What does that mean? The former colonies like India, Africa, Canada and New Zealand are trying to question the Western view of history. They are trying to create their own view of history, and in that process they are trying to create an identity, a cultural identity, a national identity, a political identity which is not found in postmodernism. So this is the similarity between postmodernism and post-colonialism. Whereas both question the center, post-colonialism is trying to create an identity, a cultural identity which is not found in postmodern writing. Now let's look at a Canadian novel, a Canadian feminist novel written by Margaret Laurence. Margaret Laurence wrote 4 novels based on an imaginary place called Manawaka. I'm going to deal with the last novel, that is The Diviners. In The Diviners, she tells the story of a middle-aged woman, but it is a story not only of a woman, it is a story of a people. It is a story of the suppressed Canadian people, particularly the people whose origin is Scotland, and they combined with the Métis people, the native people, and in this novel, the heroine, Morag Gunn, is identifying herself with a Métis fellow called Toner, but she is brought up by a scavenger called Christy Logan. Christy Logan makes Morag Gunn accept her past, and he gives her myths, stories, which make her go back to her roots. So Morag Gunn, though a modern lady, she is made to go back to her Scotch origin by Christy Logan, but soon when she comes to Toronto, she falls in love with an English professor. His name is Skeleton Brook. But here is again a cultural conflict. Skeleton Brook is a male chauvinist. Not only that, he is an imperialist. He tries to silence her even in the classroom. When he was teaching a poem by Donne, he particularly where in which Donne asks his lover not to speak, Morag Gunn questions that. How can somebody keep quiet and make love? But even though she quarrels with her professor, she falls in love with him, but soon she realizes that she cannot live with him because the professor is an imperialist and she wants to protest against him, and the novel is a protest against male chauvinism, it is a protest against imperialism, and then she goes back to Christy Logan's place and she wants to bury him and thereby again reaffirm her solidarity with her own people. Not only that, she goes back to her boyhood lover, Toner, and a child is born to them. And this child has the quality, characteristic of the Métis race. So Pick, the daughter of Morag Gunn, is a combination of the Scots element and the Métis element in the Canadian history. Margaret Lawrence wants to show that the true roots of Canada are to be found in the Scottish history and in the Métis history. And Pick is a symbol of the synthesis of the two strata. But the novel shows a kind of double movement. Right in the beginning, there is a river. The river goes both ways according to Morag and Margaret Lawrence. Why? In one sense, it seems to go from north to south. But the wind blows in the opposite direction. So, simultaneously, simultaneously, the river seems to be flowing in both the directions. And this is the symbol for Murugan's journey as well as history. Murugan goes back to her past. She wants to go to Scotland. He goes to London and then he goes to Scotland, and he wants to go to Scotland in order to discover her past. But when she goes very near her Scottish past, she says suddenly, she tells her daughter, no, I do not want to go to Scotland, I want to go back to Canada. This is a very important moment in her life, because the backward movement is also a forward movement. The journey towards the past is also a journey towards the future. Why? She rejects race in favor of the nation. She says, I want to go back to Canada because Canada is my land and not Scotland. Here is a denial of islands. By rejecting islands, he comes back to her old place, and here is a kind of questioning Shakespeare's Tempest. In the post-colonial writing, writers question the master canonical texts like Robinson Crusoe and the Tempest to show that the new people, the new literatures do require a new kind of history and a new kind of fiction and a new kind of myth. In the Tempest, man is the center. He is the magic man, and he controls everything, and he is an imperialist. But in the diviners, the magic is not with the man but with the woman. Murag, she is the magician of words, and she wants to discover and recover history and identity through her creative writing. So what matters is, here it is a woman's discovery of her identity, a Canadian's discovery of his identity, a writer's discovery of her identity. So unlike the postmodern novel, in the post-colonial novel, we find the heroine symbolizing a culture as well as women, and so ultimately the novel ends with divining in two senses. What is that? She, along with a fellow called Royland, who was a preacher, both become diviners. In what sense? Royland becomes a diviner by divining the wells, by tapping the waters. He wants to give up preaching. He said, I thought preaching revealed to me divinity. No, I can find divinity in water. This is very important. Water is a symbol of creativity, femininity, and water is something which you can touch, which you can taste. And Royland comes down to the human world, to the waters of creativity. Similarly, Murugan also divines the waters of her creative mind. So the river stands for both history and creativity. and she discovers her creativity by tapping the waters of her unconscious, and the novel ends once again with the river going both ways. What does that signify? Look ahead into the past. Look forward into the future. That is the conclusion of the novel. In order to create the future, we must go back to the past. The discovery of the past is essential for discovery of fiction. So the river, the water, the novel, everything show that we need both fiction and history. We need both past and future. And ultimately, Morag discovers the future in the past and recovers the past in the future. It is the recovery and discovery of the past and the future that make her a great writer. Not only Morag a great writer, but also Margaret Lawrence a great writer. So in post-colonial writing, the past creates the future, and there is a feminist and Canadian affirmation of identity in Margaret Lawrence's The Diviners. Thank you.